The hum of the containment field was a constant companion, a sterile lullaby in the sterile prison orbiting Silos Minor. Captain Jackson Riker stood before the reinforced cell, the chill of the void seeping into even the deepest reaches of the station. He had seen a lot in his years with the Stellar Guard, skirmishes with rogue factions, desperate pirates clinging to the edges of known space, but nothing quite like this. Inside the cell, Lyraxi remained motionless. Unlike other prisoners who spat defiance or succumbed to despair, she held an unnerving stillness. Her skin, a deep shade of twilight blue, shimmered faintly under the artificial light. Eyes like molten gold regarded him with an unsettling serenity. Reports classified her as a level Omega threat. Psychic abilities capable of crippling entire fleets, a strategic mind honed over centuries, and a ruthless efficiency in combat. Jackson had reviewed the files countless times, each report detailing the destruction she had wrought during the ill-fated raid on the colony of Viridia Prime. Thousands had perished, their minds twisted into weapons against their own, their cities turned to dust. Yet, looking at her now, he saw no monster, only a solitary figure confined by energy bars and the weight of untold expectations. He straightened his uniform, the crisp fabric a familiar comfort. "Lyraxi," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the observation chamber. "It's time for your daily evaluation." She tilted her head, her golden gaze unwavering. "Evaluations," she said, her voice a melodic cadence that defied the harsh environment. "How very terrestrial." Jackson suppressed a flicker of irritation. He was a soldier, a warden, not a diplomat. "Standard procedure. Please cooperate." "Cooperation implies mutual benefit, Captain," she replied, a subtle undercurrent of amusement in her tone. "What benefit do I derive from reliving my captivity?" He stepped closer to the observation window, his gaze hardening. "Your cooperation could influence the terms of your confinement." A lie, of course. Her fate was already sealed, dictated by the highest echelons of the Stellar Guard. Lyraxi's expression remained unchanged. "Terms of confinement. A gilded cage is still a cage, Captain. I tire of the games." Jackson sighed inwardly. He had anticipated resistance, but her calm defiance was more unsettling than any outburst. He activated the neural scanner, its blue light washing over her form. "Please remain still." As the scanner whirred, Lyraxi closed her eyes. Jackson watched the data stream across the monitor, the complex patterns of her brain activity, a chaotic symphony of alien thought. Suddenly, a sharp spike registered, an anomaly that sent a jolt through the system. "Warning," the computer announced, its synthesized voice jarring. "Unidentified psychic surge detected. Potential threat level. Critical." Jackson's hand instinctively moved towards his sidearm. "Lyraxi, what was that?" Her eyes snapped open, her golden gaze intensified. "Curiosity, Captain. A simple probe into the mind of my jailer." "You were warned against using your abilities," Jackson said, his voice tight. "Another violation, and I'll have to increase the containment field's intensity." Lyraxi chuckled softly. "Intensity? As if that could contain me. You underestimate the depths of my power, Captain, and the shallowness of your own desires." Jackson ignored the veiled jab, focusing on the scanner readings. The surge had subsided, leaving behind a residue of unease. "Evaluation complete. Return to your routine." He deactivated the scanner and turned to leave, his mind racing. Lyraxi was proving to be more complex, more dangerous than he had initially believed. As he reached the door, her voice stopped him. "Captain," she said, her tone softer now, almost melancholic. "Tell me, what do you dream of in this desolate place?" Jackson hesitated, his hand hovering over the door control. He rarely spoke of his dreams, especially not to prisoners, but something in her voice, a shared sense of isolation, compelled him to answer. "I dream of stars," he said quietly, his gaze drifting towards the distant constellations visible through the observation window. "Of unexplored galaxies, of worlds beyond our reach. Lyraxi was silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Perhaps, she said finally, our dreams are not so different after all. Jackson didn't reply. He stepped out of the observation chamber, the heavy doors sealing behind him. He walked down the sterile corridor. The hum of the prison, a constant reminder of his duty, his isolation, and the dangerous alien who now occupied his thoughts. The warden's dilemma had begun. The flames crackled, a fragile defiance against the encroaching darkness. Jackson stared into the fire, the heat a welcome contrast to the chill that permeated the prison. He found himself acutely aware of Lyraxi's presence nearby, a silent sentinel in the flickering light. Her earlier words echoed in his mind. Perhaps our dreams are not so different after all. A disturbing thought. He shifted, the metal of his uniform chafing against his skin. Why did you say that? He asked, breaking the silence. Lyraxi turned her head, her golden eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Say what, Captain? About our dreams, he clarified, his voice low. About them not being so different. She paused, considering. You dream of stars, of exploration. I dream of freedom, of understanding the vastness of existence. Are these not similar? Jackson frowned. Freedom and exploration are hardly the same thing. Are they not? She countered, her voice laced with a hint of challenge. Exploration is the pursuit of the unknown, the breaking of boundaries. Freedom is simply the removal of constraints. Both are about expanding horizons, Captain. Both are about seeking something beyond the confines of our present. He remained silent, mulling over her words. He had always viewed exploration as a duty, a service to the stellar guard, a way to chart new territories and secure resources for humanity. He had never considered it a yearning for freedom, a rebellion against the limitations of his own existence. You're twisting words, Jackson said, dismissing the notion. You're trying to find some common ground that doesn't exist. Lyraxi smiled slightly. Perhaps, or perhaps you are afraid to acknowledge the truth, afraid to admit that you, a warden in a desolate prison, might share something with the alien prisoner you guard. Her words stung, hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. He stood up abruptly, pacing the small confines of the observation chamber. I'm not afraid of anything, he retorted, his voice sharp. Are you not? She pressed, her golden eyes following his movements. You are afraid of questioning your purpose, of challenging the orders you have blindly followed for so long. You are afraid of facing the emptiness that lies beneath your disciplined exterior. He stopped pacing, his back to her. That's enough, he said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. I'm not here to discuss my personal feelings. No, she agreed softly. You are here to imprison me, to keep me locked away from the galaxy I threaten. But even in this cage, I can see you, Captain. I can see the doubt that gnaws at your soul. Jackson turned around, his eyes narrowed. You know nothing about me. I know that you are weary, she replied, her voice gentle. Weary of the endless conflict, the senseless violence, the constant struggle for power. I know that you yearn for something more than the sterile routine of this prison. He stared at her, his anger slowly dissipating, replaced by a growing sense of unease. How could she know so much? Was it her psychic abilities, a glimpse into his deepest thoughts? Or was it simply a keen observation, a skill honed over centuries of survival? He decided to change the subject, to regain some semblance of control. The scanner detected a psychic surge earlier, he said, his voice professional. What were you doing? Lyraxi's expression became guarded. I was exploring, she said simply. Exploring what? He pressed. The possibilities, she replied vaguely. The potential for change. Change, Jackson repeated, his suspicion growing. What kind of change? She hesitated, her golden gaze flickering away for a moment. The kind that can save us all, she said finally. Save us from what? He demanded, stepping closer to the observation window. Lyraxi remained silent, her expression unreadable. Jackson felt a surge of frustration. He was getting nowhere. He was supposed to be in control, interrogating her, extracting information. But instead, she was the one probing him, dissecting his emotions, challenging his beliefs. "I'm ending this evaluation," he said, his voice curt. "I'm not going to play your games." He turned to leave, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Lyraxi's words had struck a nerve, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his place in the galaxy. He couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something important, something that could change everything. As he reached the door, her voice stopped him once again. "Captain," she said, her tone urgent. "There is something you need to know." Jackson paused, his hand hovering over the door control. "What is it?" he asked, his voice wary. "They are not telling you the truth," she said, her golden eyes intense. "About me, about the war, about everything." "Who is they?" he pressed. "The Stellar Guard," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Your leaders, your superiors. They are manipulating you, using you as a pawn in a game you do not understand." Jackson frowned. "That's ridiculous. The Stellar Guard is here to protect humanity, to maintain order in the galaxy." "Order?" she scoffed softly. "Is that what you call it? An order built on lies, on oppression, on the exploitation of countless worlds?" He shook his head, dismissing her claims. "You're trying to confuse me, to turn me against my own people." "I am trying to open your eyes," she insisted, her voice pleading. "To show you the truth before it is too late." "Too late for what?" he asked, his patience wearing thin. "Too late to stop them," she said, her voice filled with a sense of urgency. "Too late to prevent the destruction they are planning." "Destruction?" Jackson repeated, his heart pounding in his chest. "What destruction?" Lyraxi closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her strength. "They are building a weapon," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "A weapon that can obliterate entire star systems." Jackson stared at her, his mind reeling. A weapon that could destroy star systems. It sounded impossible, a madman's dream. But something in Lyraxi's voice, the desperate urgency in her eyes, made him believe her. "Who is building this weapon?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyraxi hesitated, her expression filled with pain. "Admiral Marius Thorne," she said finally. "He is the one pulling the strings." Jackson felt a chill run down his spine. Admiral Thorne was a legend in the Stellar Guard, a hero of countless battles, a symbol of unwavering loyalty. He had always admired him, respected him, seen him as a mentor. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Thorne would never do something like that." "He is deceiving you, Captain," Lyraxi insisted. "He is using your trust against you. You must believe me." Jackson stared at her, torn between his loyalty to the Stellar Guard and the unsettling truth in Lyraxi's eyes. He didn't know what to believe anymore. The foundations of his world were crumbling around him. He stepped back from the door, his mind racing. He needed to think, to process everything she had told him. He couldn't dismiss her claims out of hand, not with the growing sense of unease that had been building within him for so long. "I need proof," he said finally, his voice firm. "If what you're saying is true, I need proof." Lyraxi nodded slowly. "I can give you proof," she said, her golden eyes filled with determination. "But it will require your trust and your help." The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the rough, rocky landscape of Sci-Fi. Jackson stared into the flames, the rhythmic popping and hissing a welcome distraction from the chaotic thoughts swirling in his mind. Lyraxi sat across from him, her silhouette framed by the flickering light. He still didn't know what to make of her, whether she was a dangerous manipulator or a desperate truth-teller. "So," Jackson began, breaking the silence, "you claim Admiral Thorne is planning to use a weapon that can destroy entire star systems. What proof do you have?" Lyraxi's golden eyes met his, her expression unreadable. "The weapon is called the Obliterator. It's powered by a concentrated form of dark energy, a force capable of tearing apart the very fabric of space. Jackson frowned. Dark energy is just a theory. No one has ever successfully harnessed it. Thorne has, Lyraxe countered. He discovered a way to stabilize and weaponize it, using technology salvaged from a long-lost civilization. And where is this weapon hidden? Jackson pressed, his skepticism still high. On a remote research facility orbiting the black hole Cygnus X1, she replied. It's disguised as an astronomical observatory, but beneath the surface, they are building the obliterator. Jackson felt a shiver run down his spine. Cygnus X1. Even the name sent a chill through him. A black hole was a cosmic anomaly, a place where the laws of physics broke down. It was the perfect place to hide something dangerous. Why would Thorne want to destroy star systems? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyraxe hesitated, her expression darkening. Thorne believes that the only way to ensure peace and order in the galaxy is to eliminate any potential threats. He sees alien civilizations as inherently dangerous, a constant source of conflict and instability. So he wants to commit genocide, Jackson said, his voice filled with disgust. On a galactic scale, Lyraxe confirmed. He intends to use the obliterator to wipe out entire races, leaving humanity as the sole dominant species. Jackson stared at her, his mind reeling. It was almost too much to comprehend. Admiral Thorne, the hero of the Stellar Guard, a genocidal maniac. Why are you telling me this? He asked, his gaze narrowing. Why not tell someone else? I tried, Lyraxe said, her voice filled with bitterness. But Thorne has control over everything. Anyone who questioned him was silenced, discredited, or simply disappeared. So, why me? Jackson persisted. Why trust me? Lyraxe paused, her golden eyes searching his. Because I saw something in you, Captain. A spark of doubt, a flicker of conscience. I sensed that you were not completely consumed by the propaganda, that you still possessed a sense of right and wrong. Jackson remained silent, mulling over her words. He had always prided himself on his loyalty to the Stellar Guard, his unwavering commitment to duty. But lately, he had begun to question the methods they employed, the sacrifices they demanded. He had seen too much violence, too much suffering, too much senseless destruction. Even if I believe you, he said finally, what can we do? We're stranded on a desolate planet with no way to contact anyone. There is a way, Lyraxe replied, her voice filled with determination. There is an abandoned research station a few kilometers from here. It's old, but it still has a functional communication array. If we can reach it, we can send a message to the outside world. And what makes you think anyone will believe us? Jackson asked, his skepticism returning. We have to try, Lyraxe insisted. The fate of the galaxy depends on it. Jackson looked at her, at the unwavering conviction in her eyes. He still wasn't sure if he could trust her, but he knew he couldn't ignore her warning. The stakes were too high. All right, he said, his voice firm. We'll go to the research station. Lyraxe nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Thank you, Captain. Jackson stood up, his gaze sweeping across the desolate landscape. The journey ahead would be dangerous, fraught with uncertainty. But he knew he had to try. He had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Let's move, he said, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. We have a galaxy to save. They began their trek across the rocky terrain, the twin suns of Dras 5 beating down on them mercilessly. Jackson kept his eyes peeled for any signs of danger, his senses on high alert. He knew they were vulnerable, stranded on a hostile planet with a limited supply of resources. As they walked, Jackson couldn't help but wonder if he was making a mistake. Was he being manipulated by a cunning alien led down a path of destruction, or was he truly on the verge of uncovering a conspiracy that threatened to plunge the galaxy into chaos? He didn't know the answer, but he knew he had to keep going, to follow the shadows of trust wherever they might lead the fate of the galaxy. The fire crackled, painting dancing shadows on Jackson's face. He stared into the flames, lost in thought. Lyraxy sat across from him, her presence a constant reminder of the dangerous path he had chosen. He had gone from a loyal stellar guard captain to a fugitive, allied with an alien prisoner against his own people. "So," Jackson said, breaking the silence, "what now?" "We're stranded on a desolate planet with a broken-down escape pod and a galaxy full of enemies." Lyraxy looked up from the fire, her golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. "We head to the research station," she said, her voice firm. "It's our only chance to send a message." "And what makes you think this station is still functional?" Jackson asked, his skepticism resurfacing. "It's been abandoned for decades. It was built to withstand extreme conditions," Lyraxy replied. "And I have a connection to it. I know it's still there, waiting for us." Jackson raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her cryptic words. "A connection? What kind of connection?" Lyraxy hesitated, her expression clouding over. "It's complicated. Let's just say I have a personal stake in seeing that station operational again." Jackson decided not to press her further. He had learned that Lyraxy revealed information only when she was ready, and pushing her would only make her clam up. "All right," he said, standing up. "Let's get moving. The sooner we reach that station, the sooner we can clear my name and expose Thorne's plan." Lyraxy nodded and followed him as they began their trek across the rocky terrain. The twin suns of Dras-5 beat down on them, making the journey arduous and exhausting. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He scanned the horizon constantly, his hand never far from his sidearm. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice low. "Thorne won't let us expose him without a fight." "He will send his best," Lyraxy agreed. "Elite soldiers, assassins, maybe even bounty hunters. We must be prepared for anything." As they rounded a jagged rock formation, Jackson suddenly stopped, his senses on high alert. He could hear the faint hum of engines in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. "We're not alone," he said, his voice tight. "Take cover." They scrambled behind the rocks just as a small transport ship appeared in the sky, descending rapidly towards their location. The ship landed a short distance away, and a ramp extended, revealing a squad of heavily armed soldiers. "Stellar Guard," Jackson muttered, his heart sinking. "Thorne sent his own men after us." The soldiers fanned out, their weapons trained on the surrounding rocks. Their leader, a tall, imposing figure with a stern face, stepped forward. "Captain Jackson Riker," he called out, his voice amplified by a vocoder. "You are under arrest for treason against the Stellar Guard. Surrender now, and you may yet receive a fair trial." Jackson stepped out from behind the rocks, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I'm willing to come in peacefully," he said, his voice clear and steady. "But I have information that needs to be brought to light. Information about Admiral Thorne's illegal activities." The leader of the squad scoffed. "Admiral Thorne is a hero of the Stellar Guard. Your accusations are baseless and will not be tolerated." "They're not baseless," Jackson insisted. "I have proof. Just give me a chance to present it." "You will have your chance in a court of law," the leader replied. "Now, surrender peacefully, or we will be forced to use force." Jackson hesitated, his mind racing. He knew that if he surrendered, he would never have a chance to expose Thorne. He would be silenced, discredited, and likely executed. But he also knew that he couldn't take on an entire squad of Stellar Guard soldiers on his own. Suddenly, Lyraxy stepped forward, her golden eyes blazing with defiance. "He will not surrender," she said, her voice ringing with power. "And you will not take him." The soldiers turned their weapons on her, their expressions hardening. "Stand aside, alien," the leader commanded. "This does not concern you." "It concerns me greatly," Lyraxy replied, "for I am the one who revealed the truth to him. And I will not allow you to silence us." The leader hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had heard the rumors about Lyraxi's power, her ability to control minds and manipulate energy. He knew that she was a dangerous opponent. "Very well," he said, his voice tightening. "If you choose to resist, we will have no choice but to eliminate you both." He gave a signal, and the soldiers opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, tearing apart the rocks around them. Jackson and Lyraxi dove for cover, narrowly avoiding the deadly projectiles. "We can't stay here," Jackson shouted over the din of battle. "We need to move." Lyraxi nodded and unleashed a wave of psychic energy, sending the soldiers flying backwards, their minds reeling. Jackson took the opportunity to open fire, taking down several soldiers before they could recover. They fought their way towards the transport ship, using their combined skills to overcome the Stellar Guard soldiers. Jackson was impressed by Lyraxi's combat prowess. She moved with incredible speed and agility, dodging plasma bolts and striking with deadly precision. Her psychic abilities were a powerful weapon, capable of disabling and disorienting her opponents. As they reached the ramp of the transport ship, Jackson turned to Lyraxi. "Get inside," he said. "I'll cover you." Lyraxi hesitated, her expression troubled. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What is it?" Jackson asked, his patience wearing thin. "This ship," Lyraxi began. "It's not here just to capture us. Thorn is also after something else." Before she could elaborate, a blinding light engulfed them, followed by a deafening explosion. The transport ship was ripped apart, sending debris flying in all directions. Jackson and Lyraxi were thrown backwards, landing hard on the rocky ground. Jackson struggled to his feet, his head ringing. He looked around, dazed and disoriented. The transport ship was a smoldering wreck, and the Stellar Guard soldiers were nowhere to be seen. He turned to Lyraxi, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Lyraxi was lying on the ground, her eyes closed. Jackson rushed to her side, his hands trembling. He gently turned her over, and his blood ran cold. A shard of metal was protruding from her chest, and her twilight blue skin was stained with blood. Lyraxi was barely breathing. "No," Jackson whispered, his voice filled with despair. "This can't be happening." He knelt beside her, his hand hovering over the wound. He didn't know what to do. He had no medical training, no equipment, no way to save her. Lyraxi's eyes fluttered open, her golden gaze meeting his. "Jackson," she whispered, her voice weak. "The device. There after the device." Her words trailed off, and her eyes closed again. Jackson stared at her, his heart breaking. He had failed her. He had led her into a trap, and now she was dying. He cradled her in his arms, his tears